What happens when a seasoned television journalist decides she's had enough of carefully crafted PR responses and politely calls out what millions of viewers are thinking? The tension in Studio 1A was thick enough to cut with a knife as Savannah Guthrie sat across from Meghan Markle, her usual warm demeanor replaced by something far more pointed. This wasn't going to be another softball interview, and everyone in that room could feel it. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation that had social media buzzing for weeks, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, letting me know what you think about celebrity interviews that go completely off the rails. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one because what unfolds is absolutely unprecedented. The interview started innocuously enough. Meghan had come on the show to promote her latest venture, a lifestyle brand that promised to empower women through mindful living. She was perfectly put together, as always, wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her smile was practiced and media-ready. "Meghan, thank you for joining us this morning," Savannah began, her tone professional but noticeably cooler than her usual bubbly greeting. "You're here to talk about your new brand, but I think our viewers are curious about something else entirely." Meghan's smile flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression that seasoned television watchers would recognize as the first crack in the armor. "Of course, Savannah. I'm always happy to connect with your audience. Well, let's address the elephant in the room." Then, Savannah continued, leaning forward slightly. "You've built quite a narrative around being silenced, around not having a voice. Yet here you are, on your fourth major network interview this month. Help me understand how someone who claims to be voiceless manages to secure more airtime than most sitting politicians." The studio fell silent. Camera operators exchanged glances. This was not the gentle human interest piece that had been scheduled. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately, her posture straightening as she prepared to deflect. "I think there's a difference between having access to platforms and actually having your truth heard, Savannah. When you're constantly fighting against a narrative that's been constructed about you, sometimes you have to speak louder to be heard above the noise." But Savannah wasn't backing down. She had clearly done her homework, and her next question landed like a precision strike. "Your truth? That's interesting phrasing, because I've been looking at the timeline of events you've described in various interviews, and there seem to be some significant inconsistencies. For instance, 3 months ago, you told another network that you felt completely unprepared for royal life, that no one helped you understand the protocols. But we have footage from your engagement interview where you specifically mentioned the comprehensive briefings you received." Meghan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The cameras caught everything, zooming in on her face as she processed this unexpected challenge. This wasn't supposed to happen. Media appearances were supposed to be controlled environments, where she could shape her narrative without pushback. "I think context matters, Savannah. What I meant was that while there were briefings about protocol, there wasn't emotional support for what I was experiencing personally. The institutional aspects and the human aspects are completely different things." "Are they though?" Savannah pressed, "because you've made some pretty serious allegations about racism within the institution. These aren't just personal grievances. These are accusations that have damaged relationships and reputations. Don't you think the public deserves specifics rather than vague implications?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Meghan's media-friendly facade was beginning to crack under the sustained pressure of actual journalism. She shifted in her chair to tell that body language experts would dissect frame by frame in the hours following the broadcast. "I've been very clear about my experiences, Savannah. I'm not going to relitigate every detail of what was an incredibly painful time in my life just to satisfy people's curiosity." "But that's exactly what you've been doing, isn't it?" Savannah's voice remained calm and professional, but there was steel underneath. "You've made a career out of relitigating these experiences. The interview that broke the internet, the Netflix series, the book deals, the podcast. At what point does sharing your pain become exploiting your pain?" Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked suspiciously like anger, though she tried to mask it with a look of hurt and bewilderment. "I find it interesting that when women, especially women of color, speak about their experiences, they're accused of exploitation. Would you ask a male CEO who wrote about overcoming adversity the same question?" Savannah didn't miss a beat. "Actually, yes, I would, and I have, but we're not talking about overcoming adversity in business. We're talking about making allegations you refuse to substantiate while simultaneously profiting from the controversy those allegations create. That's not empowerment, that's manipulation." The word hung in the air like a slap. Meghan's composure finally cracked, her carefully constructed mask slipping to reveal something much less sympathetic beneath. "I'm sorry, manipulation. Are you seriously suggesting that sharing my truth about experiencing racism is somehow manipulative?" "I'm suggesting that making serious accusations without providing evidence, while building a media empire around those accusations, raises legitimate questions about motivation," Savannah replied evenly. Questions any responsible journalist should ask. Meghan looked around the studio, as if searching for rescue, but the crew remained professionally focused. There would be no cavalry. She was on her own, facing the kind of sustained questioning she had avoided for years. "This is exactly the kind of treatment that drove me away from public life in the first place," she said, her voice adopting a tone that had worked in earlier interviews, a mix of wounded dignity and noble suffering. But Savannah wasn't buying it. "Actually, you didn't retreat from public life," she said. "You strategically repositioned yourself to control your own narrative while maintaining all the benefits of celebrity, without the accountability that comes with institutional responsibility. There's a difference." The accusation was surgical in its precision. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to realize that anything she said would only dig her deeper into the hole. Opening beneath her, the silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy, as viewers across America watched a masterclass in journalism unfold in real time. The silence was deafening. But Meghan wasn't someone who stayed down for long. Years of media training and natural instinct kicked in as she switched to offense rather than staying on defense. "You know what, Savannah? I came here expecting a respectful conversation about my work, about empowering women and building something positive. Instead, you're attacking me with talking points that sound like they came straight from a tabloid editorial meeting." Savannah's eyebrows lifted slightly, but her expression stayed controlled. "I'm asking questions based on your own public statements. If those questions feel like attacks, perhaps the issue isn't with the questions." "The issue," Meghan said, her voice rising slightly, "is that you're perpetuating exactly the kind of hostile environment that made my life unbearable. You're questioning my integrity, my motivations, my right to tell my own story. This is gaslighting, plain and simple." The accusation of gaslighting was clearly intended to shut down the line of questioning, a rhetorical stop sign that had worked in other interviews. But Savannah had covered politics, natural disasters, and international conflicts. She wasn't intimidated by media buzzwords. "Gaslighting is making someone question their own reality by denying facts," Savannah responded calmly. "I'm not denying your experiences. I'm asking you to be specific about them. There's a difference between questioning someone's story and questioning their right to tell it. You absolutely have the right to share your experiences. But when those experiences become public accusations that affect other people, the public has a right to examine them critically." Meghan's media smile had vanished, replaced by something more authentic and far less appealing. "So now you're the arbiter of what constitutes a legitimate experience. This is exactly what I mean about the system protecting itself. You're more concerned about defending an institution than listening to someone harmed by it." "I'm concerned about accuracy," Savannah shot back, her tone unshaken. "You've made claims about conversations that allegedly took place, but when pressed for details, you deflect. You've implied institutional racism, but when asked for specifics, you hide behind privacy concerns. You can't have it both ways, Meghan. You can't make public accusations and then claim privacy when asked to substantiate them." Meghan leaned back in her chair, clearly frustrated at her inability to steer the conversation. In previous interviews, sympathetic hosts had allowed her to shift back to safer ground when cornered. But this was uncharted territory. "What you're doing right now is victim blaming," she said, pulling another phrase from her media defense playbook. "You're asking me to prove that I was mistreated instead of asking why someone would subject themselves to this level of scrutiny unless they had no choice." Savannah nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the point, then delivered her next question with devastating precision. "That's actually an interesting point. Let's examine it," Savannah said. "You say you had no choice but to speak out, but you had already stepped back from royal duties. You had moved to California. You had your freedom. Your choice wasn't between silence and speaking out. Your choice was between privacy and profit, and you chose profit." The words landed like physical blows. Meghan's carefully maintained composure cracked further as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. Every deflection was being redirected to the core issues she was trying to avoid. "That's not fair," she said, and for the first time in the interview, she sounded genuinely hurt rather than performatively wounded. "We needed to support ourselves. We were cut off financially. We had security concerns. We had to find a way to sustain our family." "I understand that," Savannah replied, her tone softening slightly but her resolve unwavering. "But you weren't cut off because you spoke your truth. You were cut off because you chose to leave. And then you monetized the story of why you left. That's a business decision, not a brave stand for justice." Meghan's eyes flashed dangerously. The mask was completely off now, and viewers were seeing something they hadn't witnessed before. The real person behind the carefully crafted public persona. A business decision. "Are you kidding me right now? We're talking about my mental health, about thoughts of self-harm, about my child's safety, and you're reducing it to business decisions." Savannah leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I am not reducing your pain, Meghan. Mental health struggles are real and serious. but using those struggles as unquestionable shields against legitimate questions about your public statements is problematic. Millions of people struggle with mental health without building media empires around their trauma. So now I'm not allowed to heal publicly? Meghan asked. I'm not allowed to use my platform to help others who might be going through similar experiences. Of course you are. But healing publicly and weaponizing your pain for public sympathy while avoiding accountability are different things. You've created a narrative where any criticism of your actions or statements is automatically seen as an attack on your trauma. That's not healthy, and it's not honest. Meghan stood abruptly, her chair sliding back slightly. For a moment, it looked like she might walk off the set entirely. The cameras tracked her as she took a deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. I think we're done here, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. But Savannah wasn't finished. Are we? She asked. Because I have one more question and I think it's important. Meghan remained standing, her body language screaming that she wanted to leave. But something in Savannah's tone made her pause. You've spent years talking about the importance of truth, of authentic storytelling, of giving voice to the voiceless, but what about the voices you've silenced? The staff members who signed non-disclosure agreements, the family members who can't respond to your public allegations, the friends who were cut off for refusing to participate in your narrative. Where's their truth in all of this? The question hit its mark with surgical precision. Meghan's face flickered through a series of micro-expressions: anger, surprise, calculation before settling on something that looked almost like defeat. That's not how this works, she said quietly, sinking back into her chair. When you're the one with less power, when you've been marginalized, you don't owe your oppressors a platform. But you're not powerless now, are you? Savannah pressed. You have Netflix deals, book contracts, speaking engagements, worth millions. You have a platform that reaches hundreds of millions of people. At what point does the narrative of powerlessness become a choice rather than a reality? Meghan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands folded in her lap. When she looked up, there was something different in her, a kind of raw honesty that hadn't been there before. You really want to know the truth, Savannah? The truth is, I thought I could do it better. I thought I could take all that privilege, all that platform, and actually make a difference. But the system is designed to break you down, to make you choose between conformity and destruction. So, I chose a third option. I chose to leave and tell my story on my terms. For the first time in the interview, Savannah looked genuinely interested rather than skeptical. And how's that working out for you? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Meghan seemed to consider giving an honest answer, but years of media training and self-preservation kicked in, and the vulnerable moment passed as quickly as it had come. It's working out exactly as it should, she said, her defensive walls rebuilding in real time. I'm living authentically, raising my children away from toxic environment, and using my voice to advocate for important causes. Savannah studied her closely, recognizing the retreat into rehearsed talking points. But are you? She asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've traded one kind of performance for another. Instead of royal protocols, you have media narratives. Instead of palace handlers, you have PR teams. You've gone from being managed by one institution to being managed by another. That's completely different, Meghan snapped, her composure slipping again. Now I have agency. Now I get to choose. Do you though? Savannah's voice was almost gentle, but the question cut deep. Because it seems like you're trapped in this story now. Every interview, every project, every public appearance somehow has to circle back to your royal experience. You can't move forward because you're financially and professionally dependent on looking backward. Meghan's face flushed with anger, but beneath it, something else flickered, something that looked suspiciously like recognition. You don't know what you're talking about, don't I? Savannah pressed. When was the last time you had a major interview that wasn't about your time in the royal family? When was the last time someone asked about your ideas, your creativity, your vision for the future without filtering it through the lens of past grievances? The silence that followed was unlike the earlier pauses. This wasn't Meghan calculating or deflecting. This was the silence of someone confronting a truth they'd long avoided. I'm building something new, she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. Are you? Savannah asked. Because your lifestyle brand, your podcast, your media projects, they all orbit the same central theme. You as victim, you as survivor, you as truth. That's not building something new, Meghan. That's building a monument to your grievances. Meghan's hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white with tension. You have no idea what it's like to have your entire life dissected by strangers, to have every word twisted, every action questioned. You're right, I don't, Savannah acknowledged, but I do know what it's like to be a journalist. And I know the difference between accountability and persecution. When I'm doing masking, you direct questions about your public statements. That's not persecution. That's journalism. This is ambush journalism. Meghan fired back, her media polish fully evaporating. This isn't what we agreed to. I came here to talk about empowerment, about positive change. You've turned it into a character, Assassination. Savannah leaned back slightly, her expression calm despite the rising tension. I asked you about inconsistencies in your public statements. If that feels like character assassination, maybe the problem isn't with the questions. The problem, Meghan said, standing again this time with clear intent to leave, is that you've already made up your mind about me. Nothing I say will change that. This isn't journalism. It's performance. Sit down, Meghan. The command was quiet but firm, and something in Savannah's tone made Meghan stop mid-step. Because if you walk out now, you prove everything your critics have ever said about you, that you can dish it out, but you can't take it, that you make accusations, but can't handle questions, that you're the kind of person who demands accountability from everyone except yourself. Meghan froze, caught between the urge to flee and the realization that walking out would be a public relations disaster. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered herself back into her chair. Fine, she said, her voice tight with barely contained fury. What else do you want to know? I want to know why you believe you're entitled to sympathy without scrutiny. Savannah replied, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine frustration. You've made millions telling the world how badly you were treated. But you've never once acknowledged that maybe some of the criticism you received was legitimate. That maybe some of the protocols you found restrictive actually serve important purposes. That maybe some of the people you painted as villains were, in fact, trying to help you succeed. They weren't, Meghan replied instantly. Everything I've said about my experience is true. I'm not questioning the truth of your experience, Savannah said, her voice edged with patience. I'm questioning your interpretation of it. There's a difference between something being true and something being the whole truth. Meghan's jaw tensed for a moment before she found her voice. So, what's your point, Savannah? What's the endgame here? You've spent the last 20 minutes trying to tear me down, to discredit everything I've built. What do you want me to say? I want you to say something honest, Savannah replied simply. Not media-trained, not focus-grouped, not designed to generate sympathy or outrage, just honest. The request seemed to catch Meghan off guard. She stared at Savannah, and viewers could almost see the internal struggle playing out across her face. You want honesty, she finally said, her voice low. Fine, the honest truth is that I thought I could have it all. I thought I could keep the platform and the prestige without the responsibility and the scrutiny. I thought I could be a royal when it suited me, and a private citizen when it didn't. And when that didn't work, I convinced myself it was everyone else's fault. The admission landed like a confession. Silence gripped the studio. Then Meghan seemed to realize what she'd just said and her expression hardened again. But that doesn't mean the racism wasn't real. That doesn't mean the lack of support wasn't real. That doesn't mean the damage to my mental health wasn't real. No, it doesn't, Savannah agreed, but it does mean that your response to those very real problems created new ones. And until you acknowledge that, until you take responsibility for your part in all of this, you'll stay trapped in the same cycle. Meghan looked directly into the camera for the first time, her voice steady but edged with something like defiant exhaustion. Maybe that's a cycle I'm willing to stay in, if it means holding on to my integrity. Savannah's reply came fast and devastating. But that's the problem, Meghan. You've confused stubbornness with integrity, grievance with justice, victimhood with virtue. And until you understand the difference, you'll never find the peace you keep saying you want. A final silence settled over the room. Meghan stared at Savannah, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet the microphones barely caught it. I think we're done here. She stood, removed her microphone with shaking hands, and turned to leave. But before she could exit the set, Savannah delivered a final observation, one that would be replayed endlessly in the days to come. The tragedy isn't that you were treated unfairly, Meghan. The tragedy is that you had the chance to rise above it, to show grace under pressure, to prove your critics wrong, but instead, you became exactly what they said you were. Meghan paused at the edge of the set, her back to the cameras, shoulders rigid. For a moment, it seemed she might turn and respond, but she didn't. She walked off, leaving Savannah alone at the interview desk. As the cameras continued to roll, it became clear this wasn't just an interview gone sideways. It was a moment where polished media strategy collided with real journalism. A moment where narrative control slipped and something raw and human was revealed beneath the spin. Savannah Guthrie had done what few interviewers dared. She stripped away the PR veneer and forced the conversation into uncomfortable, uncharted territory. So what did you think of this explosive interview? Was Savannah too harsh, or was this exactly the kind of accountability journalism the world needs more of? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the interviews that break the internet and the truths buried behind the headline.